Hey guys, Mongoose Guns here with another unboxing and first mag review, this time of a 1911. This one here is from Tisas, which if you don't know is a manufacturer based in Turkey. And this particular 1911 is their A1 World War II clone. And to my knowledge, this is the most accurate clone that you'll find, and I'll get into why that is soon. But Tisas, they're not only known for making their World War II clones, but also just for making very affordable but quality 1911s. And this one actually, to my knowledge, is one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest one that they sell. MSRP is at $479, but I was able to find this one for about $430. Now, quickly looking at what you see here, this is what you get out of the box. Basically, there is some cleaning equipment up here. You get two Metgar 7-round magazines. One here is a spare, and then one already comes in the magwell. You get a trigger lock here, and then this is the bushing wrench tool. And then if you look up here, you get a nice chamber block flag. And another thing I want to point out is that you get the two plastic grips here just to further match the original Remington Rand 1911 look. The grips already on here are much nicer Turkish walnut, which actually feel really, really good. But honestly, I'm kind of tempted to switch them out for these just to further match the original 1911 A1 look. For this particular 1911, they've had several iterations, each of which have further improved the resemblance to the original Remington Rand production. This one here, they refer to as the ASF, or the Armed Services Family. Although I found that most online retailers, they just call it the US Army 45. So the naming is kind of inconsistent across what you find online. So if you are looking to pick one of these up, it's just important to check that SKU number and just verify you're looking at the correct version. But for my research, I think their first iteration of these, it only came with the plastic grips installed in there, and it didn't come with the Turkish walnut option. But then people complained that they were too cheap, so then they switched to the Turkish walnut. But then people complained again that it wasn't really true to the A1's history, so now they include both the Turkish walnut and the plastic, which personally I like a lot. So another thing they did on this new version is that they raised the ejection port. And virtually all other 1911s, to my knowledge, have the modernized lowered ejection port. Another thing they improved on was the finish. So in the last several iterations, these all had a gray Cerakote, but now this one has a phosphate finish, which is a chemical treatment to the metal, and I think it's a lot better. The Remington Rands, those either were Parkerized, which I think is the same as a phosphate finish, or they had what's called a dew light blue finish. So this phosphate finish makes it even more similar to the original Remington Rand. Now, another thing they mention here is on the product page is that they implement what's called a Type E hammer. Now, I'm not really sure what that is, but from what I can tell, this does look exactly like the type of hammer they used on the Remington Rands. So they're a bit thicker than I think what Colt used, and I think maybe even shorter, but I'm not sure. And also in the mainspring housing, one thing they added was the correct rib count. These have what are called 8 vertical ribs. So if you count the lines here, those are 8. I think sometimes they would have 7, but for the most part, Remington Rand used 8. Just a small detail. It's not going to be very noticeable, but it just shows how close they paid attention to that kind of detail. Also on the right side here, if I can zoom in and focus, you'll see some of the markings they put there. One thing they switched though was where they put the serial numbers. So those used to be here on the right side, but they moved it to the left, which I was kind of nervous about. I thought that was maybe going to look a little bit silly, but now that I'm actually seeing it in person, it's actually pretty inconspicuous and it's not too bad. So other A1 features you'll find are, of course, the rounded mainspring housing, which I actually like a lot more than the flat ones, but that's going to be personal preference. And of course, they have the large lanyard loop right there is at the bottom. The A1s also had a little bit of a longer beaver tail than the original 1911s. And of course, modern 1911s you'll find have the extremely long ones, but this one is kind of like an intermediate length. And I think the hammers were a bit shorter as well than the original 1911. So I think sometimes people got hammer bite from the original ones, but I think this is meant to kind of mitigate that. One downgrade I think they did with the A1s was a shorter trigger, which I think is pretty evident in the fact that all modern 1911s pretty much have the longer trigger. It's just better for a longer length of pull, but for whatever reason, they made this one shorter. So I get kind of like a worse spot on my finger that I pulled the trigger with, but it's not too bad. And I'll get into more about this trigger in a minute. The other thing worth noting is that I think the back here is a little more squared off. It's not so rounded. So when you go and grip this, you kind of feel more pressure actually in the web of your hand. So typically when I grip a 1911, I kind of rest my thumb on the safety. But with this one, my thumb kind of wants to sit more to the left just because there's a lot more pressure here. So it doesn't really, make a difference in shooting, I'd say, but it's one little thing that you might notice with these kind of older style 1911s. The other last thing kind of worth noting is that the takedown pin just kind of sticks out a little bit more on not only the right side here, but also the left side. So when I go for that grip with the left hand, I feel a lot more contact with my thumb there. So those are just some basic things that you might notice with like a A1 style 1911. All right, so moving into the ergonomics, I can't really compare directly to a real Remington Rand because I never fired one, but from what I can tell, things like the trigger and the safety, they're actually really good on this 1911, which again is a shock just for how cheap this thing is. The trigger here I'll show you. Let's quickly take the mag and just double check the chamber. We are clear. So I show you that trigger. There's just a little bit of take up and it's not really too mushy, and then you kind of hit that wall, and then from there, it's a little bit of a heavier break, but it's honestly not too bad. It's kind of hard to compare with like any other 1911s out there. For example, on my Springfield, that's obviously going to be a much nicer trigger, but for a single action gun, this is pretty good. You can kind of tell it has like that duty style trigger where there's meant to be a little bit of weight there for typical military guns, but it's still pretty crisp. There's a little bit of mush like once you get here, but I mean, honestly, it's not that bad. I'll show this to you guys one more time, and I'll show you the reset too. So I'll let it go forward a little bit. Hear that click. So it kind of shoots out a little bit, but honestly, it's, again, for the price of this gun, this is a pretty good trigger. The other thing that I was actually pretty pleased with is this safety. Now, there's sort of three different safeties you'll typically find on 1911s. I mean, these are going to be like the original safeties. And then a lot of brands kind of move to a slightly larger safety. And then a lot of the modern 1911s have like the extremely long and big safety. Those ones, of course, I like the most. But this one is actually not too bad. There's a little bit of sort of like checkering there, which the Remington Rands did have. And it's not really too heavy, and it's surprisingly easy to hit. So I'm kind of surprised by that. Recently, I was looking at the mil-spec line from Springfield, and those safeties were a lot more tough. I'm not sure if it was just the ones in particular that I was looking at, or if they're all kind of like that. So again, for a cheap gun like this, I'm just very surprised that the ergonomics are very good here. The other thing worth noting is the palm safety. So other budget 1911s, like the Gerson brand, I actually had a hard time getting this palm safety depressed. I had to be very conscious about, getting that correct grip. But for this one so far, I mean, I don't have any issue making sure this is depressed. So that's pretty important because you wouldn't ever want to be in a situation to, when you actually do need to use this thing, whether it's for sport or for, self-defense, and you can't get the palm safety depressed. But with this one, just with the normal grip, it's there's no issue getting that pushed down. So that's very nice that they made that easy to use. Last thing I want to touch on really quick are the sights. So needless to say, these are the the basic rudimentary 1911 sights, which I think are really cool. Of course, these are a downgrade from modern 1911 sights, but for being true to the classic design, it's really nice to have these because every other brand out there that tries to make like an A1 clone or a government sort of model, they all put modern sights on them. And really the Tisas is the only brand you can find, to my knowledge, that'll give you the original true sights. So it's really cool because you're basically getting a Remington Rand, which sell for, on average, I'd say $2,500, and you're getting basically the same thing for a fraction of the price, I'd say. So, I mean, at least for the looks, I can I can really praise this gun so far, but I'm gonna take this to the range soon and we'll kind of show you guys how it performs and we'll make a final verdict. But before we do that, I wanted to quickly field strip this, kind of show you how it looks on the inside, and then I'm gonna put on those plastic grips to kind of show you the final look, and then we'll go to the range. All right, so really quickly here, you can see this is of course, it's gonna be a Series 70 frame, so there is no internal safety there, which was introduced in the Series 80s. So obviously, you know, that's a good thing to have and we want that, so that's how the frame looks. The feed ramp, you can see there, it looks pretty polished. Looks very good, so. And then for the barrel and slide here, so this is of course the GI style guide rod. And then let's go ahead and push this bushing to the side and kind of push this all out. Cool, and that's basically how the barrel looks. Nothing really too fancy. And then that's the slide on the inside, so pretty basic stuff. All right, so we got it back together, and now I'm gonna go ahead and try those plastic grips on here. All right, guys, and that is the finished product. Now, is that cool or what? Honestly, if I didn't know any better, I would have thought this is a real Remington Rand at first. Now, I can't say these grips really feel much nicer. They're a lot more slippery, so we'll have to see how they actually perform. But in terms of looks, it's pretty cool how they kind of give you that option to really make it true to the history. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got for this unboxing portion. We'll go to the range and see how it shoots, and I'll give my final opinions after that. Cool. All right, so we got a set of 30 yards. We'll just see how this shoots. Not bad. I think those sights are on. I thought they'd be off, but they seem to be on. We got the 8-round mag in here. I thought I was empty. We got a stove. Not sure what that's about. Could be a mag issue. That's the last round, so. Enjoy your shoot right round. Yeah, I mean, that's the group I got, 10 yards. A little bit trending left, not too bad. I'm sure if I slowed it down, probably get a little more of a tighter group. But I gotta say, you know, the sights, they might be hard to pick up, but they're so thin, so it's really easy to see what you're shooting when you have the right target. That's 45 feet. Point of impact's a little bit high. A little bit to the left. I think that rear sight might be slightly to the left. It's kind of hard to tell. But for the most part, it's not too bad. All right, so now we're going to run this Federal Defense Act. See if that cycles okay. Got it at 10 yards. For some reason, it put much cleaner holes. I'm not sure why. These are kind of slanted. These are all clean, so 7 rounds. That's pretty good, I'd say. failure to feed. Not sure why that happened. Let's try that again. The same problem was happening to my other 1911. It's interesting. Shooting right-handed, with one hand, and that was just shooting with the left hand at 10 yards. So not too bad. This is 7 yards, so not as far, but mostly I'm pretty much on target. A couple of outliers here and there, but for the most part, it's kind of in this area. Yeah, I mean the gun shoots. You can definitely shoot this well, especially given it's a design from like 80 years ago. I mean, I had one jam. It could just require a bit of a break-in period. 2 jams? Well, okay, yeah, the stovepipe, and then technically that's 2. All right, so we are back from the range. That was exactly 100 rounds plus 7 of the defense loads that we put through it. And as you saw, we had 1 stovepipe and 1 failure to return the battery. My suspicions, though, are that either the gun is still in a break-in period, which is typically like 200 to 300 rounds, or it's an ammo issue, because another 1911 of mine was also having the same issue with that ammo, which is Federal American Eagle 230 grain. But as far as accuracy goes, I think it was pretty good for the type of shooting I was doing. I didn't try a thorough marksmanship test yet, but in terms of practical accuracy, I'm pretty pleased with this so far. Overall, the Tisas quality is pretty good, I'd say. I've noticed just a couple of nitpicky cosmetic things. The barrel finish seems to be a little bit worn already. You can see the front there, and then also here in the chamber. But I think that's pretty normal across manufacturers, so it just kind of varies from each one. The other thing, the rear sight just looks to be a tad bit off to the left. I don't think the impact was too big on the point of impact, but just a little bit noticeable. Also, I noticed this bushing seems to have just a bit of space in between itself and the slide. No kind of functional issues, but just kind of a cosmetic thing. But again, I'm not sure if that's normal with the older 1911s. The other small thing I noticed is that they give you actually an ambidextrous cut with plastic grips. The Turkish walnut grips that came with are not ambi cut, but for some reason these ones are, and I just kind of find that a little bit interesting. And speaking of the plastic grips, they actually work just fine in the recoil, so these are definitely a viable option for use. So for a $400 gun, Tisas really gives you a run for your money. I'll have to put more rounds through it to give a final verdict on reliability, but again, my suspicions are that the gun itself is fine. In terms of criticisms of the A1 design, I still, of course, prefer the longer trigger to the short one, but Tisas definitely gives you a good trigger for what it is. Also, I have to say the beaver tail on these are a bit harsh, and that is just natural to the A1's design. You can see a little bit of abuse on my hand there. I'm not sure if that's hammer bite or just the impact of the beaver tail itself. I was noticing even when dry firing before I went to the range that I did feel a bit of discomfort and pressure from this beaver tail. So I'm just not sure what it is, but just something to note in case you're thinking about either getting a real 1911 A1 or a clone like this one. So if you're looking for an A1 or just a cheap 1911 to add to your collection, so far I can say this is a great option for that. Tisas also has some more modern options if you want to spend just a little bit more money. But I can see many people will be attracted to this one, not only for the price point, but also because it does have that historical context as well. All right, guys, that's all I got. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, not only on this firearm, but also on Tisas as a company. And if I missed something or if you have any questions, just let me know about that as well. All right, hoping to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.